Here we are, real recovery talk. Don't laugh. Please don't laugh. Are you done?
Yes, you could use that as a blooper. Okay.
Here we are, real recovery talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, I have two people here, but one we're used to seeing, Benjamin B.
What's up, everybody?
And we have a lady by the name of Nicole
Bifano.
I didn't know if you wanted me to say your last name.
I'm okay with it.
Anyways, Nicole is a licensed
Clinical social worker.
and she works here at Rock Recovery Center. She is one of our primary therapists, and so we wanted to bring her on the show to really discuss some of the main things that she sees in the therapeutic, through therapeutic eyes in terms of working with the clients and stuff like that. A lot of times when clients come in here, they have generally two or three things that are pretty much across the board. We'll see, with just about every client. Everybody's situation is unique to their own individual self, but we're all cut from the same cloth per se. So we wanted to bring Nicole on here so she can kind of share a little bit about what she sees when working with clients and kind of some of the markers that we look for to see if they're making progress. And, we'll just kind of go from there. It's an organic conversation. So just give us a little bit of background about yourself. What kind of made you want to get involved in substance abuse? If it, how it makes sense for you to work with this population, stuff like that.
So I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and it's interesting. The way I got into this field, it wasn't something planned. And I felt that every time I tried to steer away from working in substance abuse, doors kept opening and kind of pushing me in that direction. And I ended up just embracing it, and it was the best thing I ever did. I've had a long history of substance abuse in my family, and in doing this work with addiction, it let me do my own work personally and actually understand this disease even further. So it was the best gift that I ever could have received to do this work with an addiction.
Was substance abuse something that you grew up seeing, or was it?
I did. Yeah, I did. Specifically with my family of origin, I saw it a lot, but it wasn't labeled as alcoholism and it wasn't labeled as addiction. It's just the way it was. But now looking back with the information I have, the knowledge I have, not just professionally, but doing my own work, I can see that it was actually alcoholism in the family.
And what do you see from your own perspective, how growing up with that surrounding you and stuff like that, has it been beneficial to you, doing what you do now? Has it been detrimental to you in any sorts of ways?
I think it's been helpful. One of the great, this is something I always tell my clients. A lot of the clients that come into our facility have trauma. And so in embracing my own, I'm able to better understand the client and better be of service to them because I've actually had to do that work myself. And now I'm grateful for what I experienced because I have a more in-depth understanding of the people that I work with and that I serve today. So
yeah, that's great. Ben, you have any questions to start us off?
No, you had mentioned doing your own work. I'll just kind of throw it out there. Sorry to blow your anonymity, but
it's okay. You can do it.
She's also a member of Al-Anon, and that has been a vital part of my personal life. My mother actually is a member of Al-Anon, so Nicole has gotten to know my mom and dad very well too. And
yes.
When she refers to doing her own work, I think it's really cool in the respect that she actually walks the walk and just doesn't talk the talk, So when families get involved, we have a family weekend here, every 5-6 weeks or so. And it's just really cool that she is able to share her personal experiences and has actually gone through this stuff herself. And she keeps referring to doing the work, working 12 steps in that program, et cetera. It just all runs so parallel.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And, with therapy and Al-Anon, both have been a substantial life-changing resources that I've had in order to do my work, but also to be able to, do what I guide other people to do. I think it's important as therapists that we do our own work and that we're in touch with our own trauma in order to better be of service to others. And I've always had a known belief that I was going to be of service to other people. I just didn't know in what capacity that was going to be. And so when God kind of kept leading me in the direction of addiction, at first I was like, what? At first I didn't even want to do it, but I knew that it kept pointing me in that direction. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to embrace this. And I am so happy that I did, because it changed my life. So
there's probably going to be therapists listening to this, and there's that old cliche, every therapist needs a therapist, and for those not familiar with the terms, we oftentimes in treatment, for those of us that work in this field, talk about transference and countertransference, and that's why it's so important to be aware of your own stuff and having done that work. Since you're the professional with the big brain, you mind breaking down what transference, countertransference is?
Yes. So and I'm going to go to what you said before, that the importance of us doing our own work is because when we sit, when I sit in front of somebody, I'm there to be of service to them. It's not about me. It's not about my role. It's about me being able to guide the person that's sitting in front of me. And so it's important for us as therapists to be able to work through those things so we understand our biases, so we understand, okay, if we get triggered, because we're humans working with human beings, we have to be able to say, okay, that's what my stuff, and I need to work through that so that I can better be of service to that person. Because if not, then your stuff gets kind of murky, and you get, an emotional response that you make it about yourself because your stuff is coming up, if that makes sense. So you have to be able to work through that. And then transference and countertransference is when, you can have a therapist that gets triggered by your client, and vice versa. The client can get triggered by you because you can remind them of somebody in their time, in their life. It could be, sometimes I've reminded clients of their spouse or their sister. And so we work through that. And the same thing can happen with us. I can be sitting in front of somebody, and that person's personality or the way they are can bring up something for me in my past. And it's only fair to the client for me to look at that, because it isn't about me. So for me to be able to sit with that person, I got to work through mine.
To just hit home an example, I've had that where, for instance, I have a client that for whatever reason, from the get-go, I just feel there's a weird vibe going on, and like they don't like me. And a lot of times a therapist will point out to me hey, Ben, they came out and said you remind them of their dad.
Exactly.
And it who was an authority figure, maybe abusive,
Right.
etc. And it actually has nothing to do with me.
Correct.
It has everything to do with the trauma that they've been through with whoever that person is. And yeah, that can really affect us, and we have to be aware of that.
And that's the transference. So if you were to have that reaction with them, that would be the countertransference.
I think one of the things that we can't go, or we should draw attention to, is being a good therapist, though, is able to identify when this is something. And you had an experience with this with one of our clients that came through before. And I think this is okay, I'm going to kind of relate this to being a mechanic. I oftentimes would tell people, yeah, I could fix that. I can do that job. I can fix that electrical issue. Meanwhile, I have no idea, or I know that I have no business doing it, but my pride and ego gets in the way. And I think that it's best that I would rather take a risk and try and do it, so I can, obviously help or whatever. And it helps me and my pride and ego, when the better thing to do would come out and say, that's out of my scope, or I can't do it, and this is why. And so take a quick 30 seconds and share on that experience, because I think that's important, because a good therapist is able to identify, hey, it's not going to be fair to the client in particular if I work with them, and this is why. Share on that.
So I had a client come in here. This was actually around the first time I started working here. And I remember we had to staff this individual, and it was myself. I think Ben was in the room too.
Yep.
And the clinical director. And I remember at one point in the conversation, I started to have an emotional response. And as a therapist, when you're in tune and mindful, you can tell when it's your empathy for somebody versus your own trigger. When it's my own trigger, I can feel a difference in my body. I can feel a difference in the way I'm emotionally reacting. And I started noticing that the way I was communicating with this client was from a space of hurt for myself. And so we ended up, it wasn't constructive. And so at that point, we ended up ending the conversation. The client got up and left. And I had a conversation, which I'm so grateful for. And this is why, as therapists, we need support. And also going to pride and ego, being able to put our pride and egos to the side and say, okay, I got to look at this. Like you said, it's in the best interest of the client, because if I can't work through that, then it's okay for me to say, you know what, it's not in the best interest for them, for me to work with them. I can't take them further therapeutically because my own stuff is getting in the way. And I'm okay with that, because at the end of the day, it's about that person and them getting help. So it ended up being that this person's responses reminded me of something from my childhood. And it turned out that he had transference with me as well. I reminded him of his wife. So it was a very helpful and therapeutic experience for me, as well as it was for the client. So
yeah, a lot of times people view therapy as like, oh, I'm just going to go in and talk to somebody for an hour. And
yeah,
it's like, and even myself, I'll oftentimes when the therapists here get into conversation about certain things and they start using all these fancy therapeutic terms and yada, 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 I'm like, I don't know, like this is kind of foreign, But all right. So anyways, for the sake of time, I do want to get into when a client enters into treatment, generally here at Rock, they have somewhere between 7 and 30 days of sobriety. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So when you meet them for the very first time,
mm-hmm.
okay, now kind of walk us through what you're looking for in a client. Like, what are the things that you look for? What are the things that you're trying to accomplish in that very first meeting with them? Like, okay, I'm getting assigned John.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like?
So I first introduce myself to them, and that way they have a familiar face, so that when I do meet with them, they remember me. So then I sit with them and we do what we call biopsychosocial, which is a bunch of questions that are getting to know the client in depth, from their medical history to their upbringing to their using history, everything. It's literally like an entire biography on the client. And so that to me is the most important session, because I'm building rapport from the minute that person walks into my office. And what I start to look for, I always tell them, like, I'm filling this out, but to me, it's not about the form. It's about me being able to start developing that therapeutic relationship with them. And so I start looking for patterns. I start looking at their history, their childhood, their upbringing. I start looking at how they say things, and as far as their perspective on themselves, their perspective on the world, how has that impacted their relationships? And then when I start going into their using history, I start looking for patterns on how did their drug of choice become a coping mechanism for a deeper rooted issue? Because I never focus on the drug of choice. That was a symptom of something a lot greater. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Okay, so I guarantee you somebody's out there listening and they would think, well, why don't you focus? They're in there for heroin addiction
mm-hmm.
or alcoholism. Like, why wouldn't you? Isn't that something to be concerned about? And you just said, I don't focus on their drug of choice. Break that down for somebody that doesn't understand that.
Okay, so they're coming in here obviously for their addiction. So what I mean by I don't focus on the actual drug of choice what I mean by that is I don't focus on the fact that they used heroin or they used alcohol or they used Xanax. I look at when and how did their addiction become something that they used maladaptively to cope with an internal issue with themselves. And when you look at the root cause, you can then really look at relapse prevention, because it's not just about not using. That's the easy part. It's changing the behaviors, it's changing perspective, it's changing the relationship they have with themselves and the world. And so I look at negative core beliefs that they had as a result of their experiences, and I look for that root that cause them to use their drug of choice as a way to cope with something greater. So in a sense, we are tackling it. It's just not my focus. My focus is their relationship with themselves.
I mean, in layman's terms, alcohol and drugs was a solution, they say.
Exactly.
And
yeah.
And a guy like me, the irony is like I'll tell our clients who come into group, and if it's their first time in treatment, I tell them, guess what? You're not actually here to learn how to quit doing drugs and alcohol. You're here to learn how to live life, because the better I can live my life, and obviously we can't avoid it completely, but generally speaking, people like myself, we come into treatment, we're super depressed, we've had a lot of trauma in our life, our anxiety's through the roof, we don't sleep at night, the list goes on. If we start living our life in a way that reduces all those negative feelings, that you mentioned relapse prevention, it's less likely that I'm going to go back to the thing that made me feel better temporarily.
Right. And for clients to learn other mechanisms to help with their emotions, to regulate their feelings, how to be able to pause and allow themselves to feel human emotions that we all experience, therapists included. We're human too. We're no different than the clients. And I always tell them that. I put my pants on the same way you do. I'm just here to guide you. But for them to learn other ways to cope with those things so that they don't go back to what they used to do that was maladaptive.
Yeah, no, it's funny. When I came out of detox, my therapist would ask me, "Oh, Ben, do you feel better?" I'm like, "Yeah, I feel better." They're like, "Well, guess what? You're going to feel better. You're going to feel pissed off better. You're going to feel your depression better." That's one of the good things about getting sober is we start getting these emotions back. That's also one of the bad things about getting sober. We get these emotions back, and when we do, we don't have the tools to
cope with them,
cope and navigate.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So do you ever have situations where like you're meeting with somebody for that very first session and it just doesn't go well, or do they generally all go pretty well?
I mean, when you say going well,
like
what do you mean?
Are you building the rapport that you're wanting to build?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honestly, I've been very blessed in that I really feel that the people that have come to rock specifically are meant to come to rock. And I'm very spiritual, so I believe in a higher power. I believe in something greater than us that I'm not in control of. And I really believe that every person that sits in front of me was meant to be in front of me. And so when I've never had an issue building rapport with them, understanding them. I understand that even if I get a defensive client, that to me, I look behind that. It's not what's that behavior showing me? It's showing me they're afraid. They're showing me that there's a lot of fear about maybe unknowns. Maybe they've had to have those defenses their whole lives in order to cope with their life. Maybe they had a really rough upbringing and all they knew was to be tough and to be on defense. Maybe that's what the world taught them. So to me, and it comes naturally, is being able to understand people without just looking at their behaviors black and white for what it is. I try to understand behavior as a language.
I'll give Nicole kudos here too. Like, I've seen her work with clients from 18-year-old females who are just wild to like 60-something-year-old men that are just super stubborn and hard-headed.
Yeah, love them all.
Everything in between.
Yeah.
And do it effectively.
Thank you.
You never know who you're going to get in front of you, all the different personalities that we have to be able to navigate.
And I embrace it. They teach me more than they know. They teach me so much. I don't like to say I'm helping them because I feel like help is the sunny side of control, which is actually a Brene Brown quote, but I'm of service to them. It's not about me, but they also, hopefully I am of service to them, but they also teach me so much, no matter how difficult the client is.
Brene Brown listens to this.
No, she doesn't.
No, you're right.
Oh my God. That would be.
All right. So give us some, the first session they meet for the bio, you build some good rapport with them. What are some things that you look at as a therapist? Like some milestones or what are some tall tale signs that either A, this person is on the right track, or B, this person is completely in relapse mode or does not stand a chance? I know it's kind of a loaded question, which I like that because obviously keep you on your toes,
Yeah, thanks.
But like just a couple of things, and I know what my answers would be, and maybe we can kind of discuss them, but
Yeah.
I want to hear from you.
That's a really good question, and I want to think about that one. And I don't want to, I don't, by any means, I'm not trying to sound, overly, optimistic or blindly or, naively optimistic, but I do believe that every single person has hope, no matter how difficult they are, no matter how they present, even if they initially come in, because we've had clients come in and we're like, oh God, this person, no way they're going to be able to get this. They're the ones that end up getting it. We're all like at a mug out, which is our coin out, saying all these things about how they've turned a leaf and they've turned a corner. And then the one that comes in, actually, I'm going to answer this. The ones that come in and overly present well, those are the ones that I worry about. Those are the ones that I'm like, okay, this is great, but when is the honeymoon period going to end? And that's when the work really starts. And that's when I actually get excited, is when they start to show up, not show up as what they think we want them to show up as.
We talk about that literally almost every podcast. We do not want you to get straight A's in treatment. We don't like the stage character. Let's see the real you. And the first day that a client gets pissed off or whatever the case is,
Gold.
You're like, finally, thank you for showing up.
Yes.
I know your body admitted 3 weeks ago.
Right.
I'm glad you're here now.
Right.
Like,
because that's when we start to see that the facade kind of starts to fall away. That's one layer of their wall coming down. And then we start to see the defenses. And if we start to see the defenses, it's like, okay, what's behind that? And then you have something to work with. That's when the real work starts, is when it's messy. And I embrace that. If you're angry, if you're sad, if you're depressed, or if you're happy, whatever emotion on the spectrum of human emotions it is, I embrace all of it. Not when it's a facade.
Which a lot of times people come in here and, they want to make it seem like everything on the outside is okay.
Right.
And they go and get the tattoos and hit the gym for multiple hours a day, take on a new diet, quit smoking, quit drinking caffeine, participate in groups, and then poof, they're gone. And you're like, well, what just happened?
Yeah.
the other part to this too is sometimes a client will come in here and their family has been running a certain role, whether you want to call that enabling, whatever it is. And when they come in here, it happens all the time. Like, let's say, for instance, we have a husband here. The spouse will call me or Tom, or the therapist, and complain, like, they're very unhappy there. They're not getting X, Y, Z, this, that, the other. On the back end, what's actually happening is we're drawing boundaries that the family didn't have. We play a different, healthier role, and the client is generally not used to that, and they're always getting their way. We did a episode on the king baby traits, for instance.
Oh, yeah, that's common.
And a lot of times the family member will be like, oh, they're upset with you. I'm like, good. That's exactly what's supposed to be happening.
Completely. I've had clients come in and they're like, I'm angry with you. And I'm like, great, let's talk about that. What's behind that? It's okay for you to be angry with me. I embrace the fact that you're even brave enough to come and tell me you're angry with me. That shows rapport in itself. So I think that's a good thing.
So let's you have the bio, you build rapport with them, you feel like everybody has hope. So do I. But let's call it what it is. Not everybody's going to get this on their first try or their 10th try.
Right.
What are some of the common things that you see? And let me preface by saying this. Primarily, the people that listen to this are families, loved ones of an addict in their life in some capacity. So you're talking to them. Hopefully they're watching on the YouTube channel. But what are some things that you see that they can think, okay, my son, daughter, spouse, whatever is home, aunt, uncle, they're home, and I'm seeing this? This is a red flag. Because a lot of times these red flags, although we want them to present while they're in treatment, oftentimes they don't, and they will present whenever they get home. So kind of give a few things to look out for, not only that you look out for while they're in treatment, but things that they can look out for when they do transition home.
So typically I'll start with when they're here. Typically if I start to see any type of and again, they're going to go through their ups and downs emotionally. They're going to go through kind of this with their emotions. They're going to have good days. They're going to have days where they're in the middle. There's going to be days that they're not so great. But I think that when they're here with us and you start to see isolation, you start to see them pull away from doing their programs, when you see them starting to kind of argue everything against every single suggestion, not being humble in the sense of remaining teachable, when you start to see their defenses being front and center, and they're not allowing themselves or being willing to work around that, that's usually a big red flag that they're taking their will back, as we say in the rooms and as we say in treatment. And so when we start seeing them take their will back, that's typically when they want to do things the way they want to do them. And that usually ends up in the same situation they've always been in. Now, that can also translate when they go home. But the most important thing for families, and I'm also a loved one, and like Ben was saying, I've worked the steps. I have a sponsor through Al-Anon, grateful member, is that we have to remain focused on how we cope with whether the addict is using or not. That our serenity is not dictated based on what they're doing or not doing. And that's the hardest part, but that's why we need support. And that's why we need to do the work on ourselves. They have to walk whatever journey they have to walk through. And you're right. They might come in here and they might go home, and that might not be the last time. And that's scary for families, but allowing them to go through their process, meaning falling short, making a mistake, maybe sometimes relapsing, because that's what they're going to do because you can't prevent it. That might be the thing that they need in order to make a solid change. And so all you can do is love them, support them, but not try to change them or control them.
I do find it necessary that you said support them, and we do not mean financially.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thanks for clarifying that. When I say support, I mean emotional support, not financial support. And
I think there's a lot of time, and even emotional support, though, a lot of times, loved ones can get this misconstrued. Like,
yes,
it's really strange. Like, emotional support. Define that, I guess, a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out. What I mean by that is, being there, let's say if they call you and they're like, you have to obviously take into context that particular relationship. Every relationship is different. Boundaries are going to look different for everyone. That's why they need their own supports. But you can be there to love them. You can be there to hear them out. If they're starting to impede on your serenity, that's when you have to start saying, okay, what is it that I need to put in place to have a boundary? Also, there's a lot of anger and a lot of resentments that come along with this disease, not just for the addict, but for the loved ones. Most important thing is to not come from a place of self-righteousness or they're bad and I'm good, because that just creates more turmoil in the relationship. That's why it's important. It's important to address that hurt. It's important to address that resentment, but just not with the person that's sick and suffering, not with the person with the disease. They need a therapist for that. They need their sponsors for that, supports, so that when you are in front of your loved one, you can just be present with them, have conversations with them, and you're not pouring all that on them, creating more resentment in the relationship, if that makes sense. So
makes total sense to me. What about you, Ben?
On the financial support part, we have a saying that we say behind closed doors, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And what I mean by that, for instance, is like a lot of times clients will put their family members' backs up against a wall and tell them, say, for instance, one that we hear a lot of times when they go to IOP level of care, which is when they're supposed to start looking for work, they're titrating down the number of hours they're doing clinically, and it's supposed to become more real life. They'll say something like, if you don't send my car down here, then there's no way that I can work this program. Mm-hmm. How am I supposed to get to meetings? How am I supposed to get a job? And the fact is we have a ton of clients that do very well without cars. In fact, a lot of the times I believe that they are actually at a benefit. Mm-hmm. And I've seen more oftentimes than not, someone, for instance, has a vehicle and they get sidetracked from their recovery because they start using the ways they shouldn't. Rather than going to a meeting like they intended to, mm-hmm. they're just spending the whole day at the beach, and it's so the financial part of it, like, this is why it's so important to have people like Nicole and ourselves to kind of be there to mediate that, mm-hmm. what's healthy right now, because there are cases too, don't get me wrong, where I'm like, yeah, this person is literally doing everything, and I do think that their car would benefit them in IOP.
Right.
That's not a bad idea. So not every case is black and white.
Yes, that
And
part.
so I want to encourage the families, while Nicole's talking, we're talking about with the client, the warning signs for them. We also have to be there with the family as well, with the warning signs that they're giving off too. And because that relationship can totally throw off a clinical treatment plan.
Completely. I think it's important that families allow, as hard as this is, allow them to feel the result of the consequences of their addiction, because you don't know if that's the thing that's going to help them change. Why would they if they're never feeling any consequence when mom and dad are always there to pick up the pieces? Why would they make any changes if they do that? What emotional support would sound like was, what, I love you. I hope that you're getting the help that you need. I will always love you no matter what, but you need to go through this. This is your journey. And I'm going to take a step back and allow you to have yours.
Not only consequences, but I'm also a firm believer in clients building self-worth. Like, for instance, accomplishing things that they didn't realize that they could accomplish.
100%. Yep.
No, because once in a while we'll hear a family say, because it wasn't actually the client's car, maybe the parents owned it, they bought it, whatever the case is. They're like, we sold your car. And the client gets super upset. And at the end of the day, we're telling them, you can do this without your car. Let us help you out with the plan that you can execute. Then the client ends up doing everything that they say. And guess what? They go and buy their own car. And now it's not a hand-me-down or a gift from mom and dad. It's something that they actually earned. And I refer to that as recovery capital. Like, it gives them confidence to say, hey, I was never able to do this on my own. Like, because I can tell you my own recovery, when I turned around and bought my first car, like, that was an awesome day. I could say to myself, like, I did this myself through hard work and working a program and showing up to work and being a responsible human being. It makes a big difference. And I've seen that side of it really debilitate clients as well. The parents that just go against what we advise, they send them everything unbeknownst to us. For instance, when someone's in IOP, you're supposed to be paying rent. It's a law in the state of Florida. You can't live in a sober house without having a client pay rent. The client behind closed doors will be receiving money from the family.
Nicole, thank you so much for coming on. I hope that if you're listening or watching that you did get something out of this. I know that it can be a lot. It can be a lot for loved ones that are dealing with this stuff. It's kind of a lot going on, but that's why if you need a therapist, get a therapist. If you need support programs, reach out to us. We can connect you with somebody or some sort of program around you. If you want to reach out to myself, you can email me, tom@realrecoverytalk.com, ben@realrecoverytalk.com. Last thing before we end, Nicole, give us a 30-second, I'm a loved one. My son or daughter is just, they're in a bad way. What's the first actionable step that I can do?
The first thing I would do, I would look up the most close meeting for Al-Anon. I would just go. Just look it up on your phone. Go, listen, take in the message. If that one doesn't work, go to another one. Reach out to a therapist that is well-versed with addiction, and know that there's hope. There's no situation that's a lost cause, and that there are people out there that have done the work themselves, have been in the same position, and that you are not alone. That is the most important thing. But the first step is to go get some support for yourself.
Perfect. Love it.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Anytime.
Come back. Keep coming back.
All right.
Keep coming back.
That is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching on YouTube. If in fact you like this show, please give us some sort of comment. Ask us a question. Ben loves questions. Leave us a review. If you want to leave us a review, that would be great. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or any of the other podcast players, leave us some sort of review on there too. 5-star preferably. If you want to leave us a 1-star, totally fine. Just email us first and tell us why, so potentially we can fix it. And share this episode with somebody that you think might benefit, so ultimately we can help you Turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.